I think that Black History Month is just a month where, we need to look at celebrating diversity all year round. That African Americans have been the forefront of the civil rights movement for a while, but as the conference has hit on the You Can Play initiative, looking at sexuality issues, I think Hispanics, I also think now there's a couple Asian Division I athletic directors. If you look at Florida Atlantic, if you look at Vicky at Colgate. So I think that you're starting to see more colors in the spectrum, and that's what I'd like to see continue. If African Americans are the ones that had to knock down the barrier for these conversations to happen and for other races and ethnic backgrounds to get their recognition, I'm all for it. But I think we, as a culture, being sports, being our society in America, we have to do a better job of being more inclusive throughout the entire year and not just giving people 1 month to celebrate their heritage. So I think for today's student athlete, they're allowed to have a different conversation. And by allowed, I mean it's permitted. People are going to engage them in conversations that probably were a little more taboo, even for my generation coming through. We're a little more interdependent as a society, so some of these conversations are normal or par for the course for today's student athlete. And they don't look at each other the same way we used to look at one another, even in my day and before my time coming up. So I think it's a good thing that we're having the conversations, but I also think as administrators and coaches and support staff, we have to be careful about how those conversations take place and to make sure they're done in a respectful manner and that people also understand the struggles of the people that came before them. I think that is a point that often gets lost on today's student athlete, because they see the fruits of other people's labor, but don't really understand the struggle that others had to go through for it to be the way it is today. I've always had minority role models and non-minority role models. Doesn't really matter to me. It matters about the character of the person, which was my biggest concern. So growing up as a baseball player, for example, people like Ken Griffey Jr. Was a role model for me. People looked at him funny because he wore his hat backwards, but still to this day, no one would ever say a bad word about Ken Griffey Jr. He was a model teammate. He was a very talented baseball player. So he was someone that I looked up to and tried to emulate, being a minority playing baseball with not a lot of minorities around me. There are several people that have been my mentors that are Caucasian, that understand it from a different perspective, can tell me what presidents or ADs are looking for. So when I'm going through an interview process, I have a better understanding of that. So I don't ever want to slight the non-minorities that have played a huge role in my life from the time I was a little baseball player, still till today, when I call them and lean on them for information and guidance as well. Yeah, I try to do two things. One, I try to do my job very well. If I do my job well, it will open up doors for others. So it's more about doing a good job, because people will then have opportunities after you. People will say, well, Ed could do it, so so-and-so can do it. It's no different than women in sports, kind of like the luncheon today when you heard Jenny Finch talking. The other thing I try to do is be accessible. In order to get people to understand what it takes to get to my position or to be successful, you have to give them access. It was hard for me because I didn't have a lot of people to lean on, but the ones I did, I leaned on heavily, like Lee McElroy. There's not a time I can't pick up the phone and have a conversation with Lee about anything personal or professional. So I try to reciprocate that effort to other people coming up, and not just minorities. I want them to understand how difficult this path is, the type of passion that you have to have for it, and why we're in this business for the right reasons. So I try to give back by doing those two things. But don't get it confused. If I don't do a good job, I personally believe there will be less opportunities for those who come behind me, because I will have failed. And so it's important for me to do well. And if I do well, I believe that will open up the doors for others behind me.